if you use anything but pure watercolor, your painting ceases to become a watercolor if you were to enter into any shows. Some are pretty particular, or galleries. You cannot call your piece a watercolor if you've done that. And that's okay. I'm good with that. I'm just happy to be creating. I'd like to welcome the Process Art Discovery audience. Today, I'm Lynda Norman. I'm a watercolor artist in British Columbia. In the studio today, we're going to be making some more birch trees. This time, we're going to be using some watercolor ink and some acrylic ink, combined with a little bit of Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed-proof white to enhance our lovely trees. So as you know, I love my birch trees. They're so fun to do. I find that's my go-to. That's how I relax. I can just create these trees right from start to finish, the whole process, from laying down the masking tape to create the shapes and the forms to creating the background and making it all come together is just something that's been really enjoyable for me for years. And recently I brought into my studio some different products to add to my watercolors. I've got De La Rowney's Aquafine watercolor ink and some acrylic ink. The watercolor ink is in burnt umber. The acrylic ink is a black, and we'll use that to enhance some of the bark and some of the undergrowth and branches on our design. And then also a little bit of Dr. P.H. Martin's bleed-proof white. I always get hung up on that. Say that 10 times fast, right? Just to bring out some of that white that oftentimes we get carried away and forget to leave the white of the paper for our paintings. So we'll work with those. I'm going to just show you a couple of examples here. These I've done recently, and using my typical moody colors. I like that winter look of the birch trees, and we're just coming into spring here now in the Okanagan in British Columbia, and I'm sure in the next few months I'll evolve to more greenery and more brighter colors. But today I'm still in love with these rich, dark, deep colors of winter and early spring. So we'll work on these, and today I'm going to be using Bauhong Masters watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton. As always, cold press matte. And it says fine grain, but when you look at the actual paper, you can see that it has a pebble to it. And that, to me, is important. It gives me that little extra interest to what I'm putting onto the paper. This is a square block as well, and it is a block, so it's glued on all sides with a tiny opening here that you can slip your palette knife or something into and pull it off once it's dry. I love the block for that reason, because no matter how much your top page that you're painting on may buckle and warp a bit, once it's dry, if you've left it on the block, it will go right back to where it needs to be and be quite beautiful. And the square is something that's, I think, becoming more and more popular these days. So I brought this into the studio. I bought it from Michael Solovia's Watercolor Online studio. I'm sure it's available online at many other locations as well, maybe even in your local art supply store. So keep an eye open for that. Bauhong Masters watercolor paper. A lot of artists around the world now are using Bauhong. I understand they're a company that works well with artists and understands how important it is to listen to artists and kind of address the needs of people who paint with watercolor and understand how important the surface that we paint on is to us. So I'm going to get started. This is a bit of a process, but as always, I'm going to make some tree shapes. I don't always give a lot of thought to where they go once I get started. I just, if you refer back to these This one comes right from the bottom of the page and goes up, and then I've got some in the background. I love that. And this one as well, I've kind of copied that theme. So maybe we'll start with something like that. I've already laid that down, so that'll be one of the ones that doesn't go to the bottom. And maybe we'll do it the opposite direction from the other. Oh, there it is. The thing about this black tape is that it's hard to see sometimes where the edges are. So we will not worry about that. We'll go to the next one. This is a wider one. This is a 3/4 inch. This is a 1 inch. But for the big tree that's going to come off the bottom, I don't want it centered. I want it off to the side a little bit and at a bit of an angle. So we'll get this guy in. I'm not going to worry this time about getting the edges of my tape more regular. Sometimes I do, but that's quite time consuming, and you can always adjust that with, especially because we're using darker colors with the inks, we can always adjust that a little bit with our paintbrush and our plastic. So I think I would like to make this sort of like a double tree, because often these beautiful trees grow close together. Traveling recently to northern Alberta, I saw so many aspens and poplars and birches. I don't even know 100% how to tell the difference, but they're all majestic and beautiful, and their barks are beautiful in how they create or how they show different colors, how they reflect the light. Absolutely amazing. So we'll just make this little guy come this way, and the longer you get the pieces of tape, the more tangled they want to become. And let's put this guy back here a little bit, make them a bit irregular. And in one of the other ones, I kind of put a fallen trunk along the bottom. We can certainly do something like that. Maybe just rip that a tiny bit more. No, I don't think that's the place for it. It just doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do there for that. I'm going to, I think, just leave these the way they are. I'm just gonna take this tree and make him a little smaller at the top. That's great. With the smaller branches, I'm going to use, because I've got that beautiful dark ink, I'm going to be able to use that to draw those on with my paintbrush. So I'm going to leave that for now, and any of the branches that I want to have coming out. So for now, just because I want to get painting, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing the masking tape. Sometimes that's, a part of the project that I can spend a lot of time on. Just making that happen. It's a really, really fun thing to do. Reminds me of, the days when I did a lot of crafts with my kids and creating that way with different materials. So here we go. That's not sticking down. I'm not going to worry about that because I can always add that with the paint and the inks afterwards as well. So my trusty palette, Eco palette from Watercolor Online. Nice big wells because I love to use nice big brushes. Get everything nice and juicy wet. It's filled with my favorite Daniel Smith colors. I've taken one pan out and replaced it with an empty one because I do want to add another color. I've taken out a yellow that I had that was kind of opaque and cloudy looking to me, and I didn't feel that I needed that with my semi-transparent and my transparent watercolors. So I'm thinking now about what I'm going to put in there, and I might even go to something like an ultramarine or a cobalt blue, something to just brighten things up a bit. As I said, now that we're getting towards spring, it's nice to have some brighter colors. So we're going to get some background in here. I'm going to use this 5-line solo brush, another product from Michael Solovia's Watercolor Online. And you could also use a hockey brush. This one's, I think, 1.5 inches. You can get them in all sizes. The hockey brushes are made with goat hair. They hold a ton of water. So if you're doing big washes, they can be really, really handy and helpful to have. I think for mine, because it's it's basically what, 12 inches by 12 inches, 11.8 by 11.8. So I'm going to just use my 5-line solo brush to get the water on. When I make my skies, I'm not worried too much if there's a bit of a bit of the page that's not wet, because that just allows the paint to go on in a more rough appearance, and also it allows a bit of that white of the paper to kind of shine through. And if we're going along this still early spring, late winter kind of theme with those birches to use these colors, I'm going to stick with my Mayan dark blue. And I just dabbed it once into my wet paint and took some of it off because I didn't want so much of that dark color at the moment. I'm just going to do a really rather light wash in terms of the depth of color. And you can see where there's some white, some lighter patches happening. And then if I just barely touch the tip of my brush into that paint, I can get some darker things happening here. And I sometimes will just bring a bit of this in here and there, just sort of to give you the indication of the underside of maybe some clouds. And because the page is wet, those beautiful pigments and lines there will diffuse and become quite beautiful in the background. Now the page is still fairly wet. I'm going to take a paper towel and use my damp brush just to, well, first of all, I'm cleaning my brush off a tiny bit, but I'm also dampening the paper towel slightly, because that gives me that sort of, I don't know, it's a softer approach, a softer feel. The towel is more easily shaped into a rounder form, so that if I'm going in to dab out some clouds, I can have a rounder portion to do that with. And I'm just going to look here. I can take a bit of that. And I think we'll just leave that at that. We don't need a lot of it coming out of there. And for some lovely background, I think we're going to stick to the blues and the blacks and the sepias, just to keep us with that sort of theme that's sort of pre-spring. We get that sort of gray and brown business happening. So I'm going to just dab once into my Mayan blue, dab a tiny bit of that off, and I want to make just the indication of something happening in the background. There's some tree shapes, there's a bit of a hill maybe happening, and this will diffuse. Again, I'm still using my 5-line solo brush. I don't need to have anything smaller at this point. Because the page is still wet, I'm getting these beautiful organic shapes that are still going to continue to move with the moisture on the page. And I see there's a hair there. Sometimes if it comes off easily by doing that, otherwise it's good to just leave it there and take it off when it's dry. When I think of the rule of thirds, when I'm putting these things on, I don't want anything to be really dead center. So I'm trying to create my shapes sort of off to the sides a little bit. just with the edge of this brush. You can see where, you know, it held such a great amount of water for the wash, but it's also, if I sort of scruff it out a tiny bit, it can give me these beautiful tree shape things happening in the background. And I love that that's there for me. All right, now, I don't have sepia in my palette any longer, so I'm going to, I think I'm going to go with a bit of our quinacridone gold. And I'm just going to see with a bit of moon glow to see if that doesn't give me a bit of a brown, purple and yellow, right? And it sort of is giving me this grayish brown happening. With a bit of yellow underneath. That's good. That'll give us a nice contrast. And it'll work well with the burnt umber that's going to be coming in with the gold, or with the ink rather, the watercolor ink. And let's give, I think we'll give the whole undergrowth here this basis of that color. And then I'm going to go in later on with adding the other with the inks. I see where a bit of that blue in the sky has just sort of looks a bit dark there. I just want to pull that out a tiny bit. It seems like it's pretty dark. Okay. Now you can see, because I used the quinacridone gold, how it's pushing up into the blue, which is kind of fun. Didn't mean to dip that. I wanted to see what that color was, and it's not what I wanted. I'm going to go back into my Mayan blue. And we're going to just create some. So if this is a bit of a hillside, perhaps, and we want a bit of shrubbery happening, put some organic edges there. And then this side here would be perhaps a bit more of a hillside on that one. This one's going to come up higher. And we're going to get some deeper colors in here. We're going to enhance that later on with the white and the burnt umber inks and the black inks. At this point, I want to use my little plastic just to create some rock type of shapes, just to anchor the bottom of the painting. So I'm almost at a point where I can see the paper it's glistening, but it's not pooling. So we're going to be able to move that around a tiny bit, the pigment that's on the surface. And I'm just going to clean my brush before we move on, so I don't forget and dab in with something else. Now I've got a little piece of plastic here. It's almost not large enough for this. I don't want the rocks to look pebble-like. I want them to be a bit larger. So I'm just going to see if I can move a little bit of this ground down here and make it, and we'll go left-handed and see what happens. That's always a fun exercise to do too, as well. Is just to, use your opposite hand and see what you can come up with. And we're just going to shape a few shape a few things here. Trees aren't going to grow out of the rocks, so we'll just leave some room for some shrubbery to come up around there. But I do want to have just a little bit of this happening here. I'm using a credit card or some kind of a card that has a rounded edge. Often if you use one that has a very pointed edge, or if you're cutting your cards to use for smaller shapes, I like to make sure that I round those edges off a little bit. If you leave them really sharp from a cut edge, you can really damage your paper. So I'm just moving a tiny bit more here. I'm just going to turn this because it's easier for me to work with the pressure that I want to put on. I'm using a fair bit of pressure to move this paint, this pigment across the page. And it's good. It's not damaging the paper, but I am using a fair bit of force. So I like that we've got some rocks happening here. It gives sort of an anchor to the basis of my painting. So things are still a bit on the dampish side. I'm going to leave that background now, I think. Let me just make sure that I've got the things flowing the way I want them to flow. There we go. And I'm going to have to take, I was a little heavy-handed with the water, and so I'm just going to pull a bit of that off the tape because it is sitting there. And this is the tricky part. Because I'm using really beautifully crafted paper, this is going to be a lot easier. And because I'm using the solo tape designed for this, I'm not going to have the issues that I possibly would have if I was using a lesser quality paper and just a regular masking tape, because often the tape will pull away the surface of your paper. So I'm going to work this as low and slow to the page as I can. I love that because I didn't burnish my tape down, you can see how the colors are sort of leaked under the edge, bled under, and that's just going to add to the texture on the side of my trees. And this is, I'm going to go this way. Yeah, look at those beautiful little organic bits of color. You can see this tape it's amazing. It's so sticky, and yet it's not affecting my paper. It will stay, they say, without damaging your paper up to, I think, 14 days, 10 for sure. I've left it longer and it's not ever been a problem. But you do still have to be very gentle and very careful. All right. I like that we've got some nice strong tree shapes here. Get rid of some of this tape and paper. All right. And there's a couple of ways you can approach your trees. You can use little bits of plastic and dip it into your paint. You can use a little fine point brush. These are acrylic brushes. I think they're stiffer. They're going to hold their shape, and they come to a very crisp edge. So you can see that if you were to, I'm going to start on this side of the page. if you just touch them to the side of your tree and pull them across, you sort of get that textured look. So you can do either way. You can use thicker paint right out of your palette, or you can have some watered down on the edge and try that. These little tabs are really wonderful. Some of them are quite thick on the end. I've got a little sanding block here, and I often will give them a little bit of a buff just to find them, make them a little finer on the bottom part where I want the paint to be coming from. I'm just going to do a few of these with this. Just, I like to use both this and the brush because it gives me a nice variety of shapes and bits of color that I can add to my. And I'm just going to do a little tiny bit of the blue. Because I've got blue in my background, I kind of like to have that in the tree as well. It gives, I don't know, it just sort of gives things a little bit of a bit of cohesiveness, right? There. I think with the blue we'll go on both sides, and I'm going to spray my paints down just a little bit again. And we'll start on this side. The page is still pretty wet. I might, you know, if I was just puttering around in my studio on my own, I might have left this a little longer to let those bottom parts dry, but that's okay. I'm trying to be careful not to make it look stripy. Okay, so I'm going to alternate things a little bit here. Some of them a little bit closer, some a little further away. And sometimes I'll only do maybe on 2 parts of the tree. We've got lots of other options to come. Now here you can see, maybe you can see, I don't know if you can, I missed the mark on the side of my tree. So this is where this, you know, my tree is going to become a little more irregular. I did notice that some of those trees were pretty tall and straight looking, but they do have a bit of irregularity to them, that's for sure. And it's nice to have a bit of darker on the bottom, especially like here we've got this tree probably will make that guy the front one, so he'll come this way. There we go. All right. So let's go in with our Burnt Umber Aquafine Watercolor Ink by Daler Rowney. These are available at your local art store, craft stores, online. And it's a watercolor ink. It looks like it's pretty true to the color Burnt Umber. And I'm going to, I don't want to be dipping out of the bottle. It's got a dropper, but I don't think I want to use the dropper to add my paints to. Just trying to find a little container here that would work for that. And I think this is one actually that I had used for that before. So I'm just going to put a little bit in that cup. And then I'm just going to dip my brush in there. I want to just try. This is always a good idea, you know, when you're doing something new, to see how much of that I have on my brush. So I know now how much is there. I can be more careful with the pressure that I put on. So if you lay your brush on the edge of your tree shape and just pull, press down, pull up, and that kind of gives you that sweeping curvature of the tree. And we'll add some of that right around that blue. And you can go right over top of your paint just to sort of blend those colors. What's happening here is that it's reactivating. It's like water, reactivating this little bit of the Mayan blue that I had on there. And I love that it's sort of giving that complex bit of shading where there's the two colors blending together. And you can use, you can use your brush to define the edge of the tree if you want to have just an indication of where the side of the tree is. You don't have to bring it across all the time. And just work your shapes until you get a visual of how you think you like the look of that stroke. That some can come further out. Here I'm pulling the Mayan dark blue across a little bit. A little bit darker on the bottoms. And this one's shaded because it's behind a little bit. Now we're going to be using some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. So if you get a little heavy-handed and things don't look quite the way you had intended, you can always touch up with the white. Typically, if you use anything but pure watercolor, your painting ceases to become a watercolor. If you were to enter into any shows, some are pretty particular, or galleries, you cannot call your piece a watercolor if you've done that. And that's okay. I'm good with that. I'm just happy to be creating things that to me feel visually satisfying, visually appealing. So if they're not considered a true watercolor, then I'm happy to go with a multimedia tag on it. Doesn't bother me. So there's these beautiful, and this, my gosh, this is like therapy. You could spend hours just creating these beautiful beautiful trees and work through the colors. I've used Aussie red gold and quinacridone gold and reds and purples and all kinds of things in my trees. Have some fun. They're your trees, as I've always said, so you can do whatever strikes your fancy. This is a really good exercise to sort of see how your colors come together. If this was a painting where I wanted to consider a light source, then that would be something I'd be thinking about now, as to, where I would leave the dark side of my trees. This is a pretty gloomy one, so I'm not going to worry too much about that, I don't think. But we can get a bit more of this brown, and then I want to move on to the black just to show you how. That Mayan dark blue is pretty dark looking, but once you get that black in there, it'll really pop. It's I'm going to go back in and look at some of those photographs that I took, just to see if there isn't some kind of a rhythm or a rhyme to how those marks appear on a tree and why that happens. It's just amazing to me how, you know, how beautiful they are. Put a little bit more of that one on there. I think I kind of like having the brown as the edge side of the tree on some of these. And this is really fun, I think, where, you know, the dark blue is kind of splotchy there, and it gives it that organic kind of feel. And I'm just going to quickly turn it, do a little bit on the bottoms, and then we're going to switch to the black. Somebody did tell me once that the trees, there's a way to do the rings or the shapes that you put onto a tree to indicate the roundness of it, whether it's close up or farther away, but I can't remember what that is. So I tend to just do mine this way. I curve them, not a lot. I don't want them to look spirally. But you can see just by having my brush damp with that ink, how when I touch this Mayan dark blue, it's pulling it out into the shape of the tree, and it's also staying a little bit on my brush, so that gives me another depth of color to this brown burnt umber. And a little bit more here. The black is going to be similar in some respects, but it is an acrylic ink, whereas this is a watercolor ink. And just a tiny bit more here. Okay. Like I said, I could spend hours at this part of the process. That's for sure. And just a tiny bit here. And let's go with some black. So this is, better tip it before I open it. It's another Daler Rowney product, FW acrylic ink in black. Again, it comes with a dropper. We're just gonna put a tiny bit in there. It's just as liquid appearing as the watercolor ink. So it's like the consistency basically of water. It's not thick like you would think of an acrylic paint. And let's just give that a go and see how we can create just, it's going to be much more intense than the blue, the Mayan dark blue, of course. And you can put that right on top of some of the I keep wanting to call it sepia, but it's not. It's the burnt umber. And I think, well, let's try it. But I think I would rather stick with a brush with this. But let's try it with our little plastic and see what happens. So it gives you a little bit different texture at the end of it, okay, than the brush would. So let's continue with that, and let's do a couple of these. Feels like it's all over my hand, but I don't think it is. Do a couple of these and and then go back with the brush and see where we... So I'm dipping it into the ink. I'm holding it straight down when I hit the edge of my tree, and then I'm laying it down slightly and pulling it. So a dip, a lay down, and a pull. And if you do that with various amounts of ink on your plastic, you'll get the different textures. So I haven't reloaded it yet. I'm just going with a tiny, tiny bit of that ink on there. You can also use it if you just wanted to make a fine line up the side of a tree, or any shape really. So if you want that defining edge here where the tree is against a darker background, you may want to have that little bit of darkness indicating that there's the edge of the tree there. And you can just do that by laying the edge of the plastic down. Now, because that's there and it's damp, it's wet, I can use that to pull through. So there's lots of things you can do with these colors once you've got them. Put the odd one through the middle, giving it a little bit of a variation, a little bit of interest. This is going to go a long way. I've hardly got anything on my brush. It's just what I've picked up from the edge here, and I'm still able to, to go in and create these beautiful lines by pulling them right across very lightly. You do get that bit of color, but the white of the paper still kind of sparkles through, and that's going to give you a bit of brilliance in the painting, a bit of color to pop. It's going to help your colors pop for sure. Okay, so these trees are getting near completion. I could, like I said, I could play with this for hours. And I think we'll make these a little darker on many of the edges because we can. And these little ones in the bottom here, you want them kind of to be shadowed behind, sort of behind that one, the tree there. And I don't want them to be stark white, so I do like to have a little bit of just a hint of a color coming across. I kind of like how this tree is evolving. It's got a little bit of white showing through, but also enough color that it's giving it some depth and some texture. And you notice I haven't touched my brush into that ink for quite a while now, and I'm still able to bring color through the page, through the tree shapes. And we can I think when we come down where the trees get closer together, there's a bit of shadow in there. We can bring out a bit more of the darkness through. Sometimes I give the brush a bit of a wiggle just to anchor it into the spot before I pull it across. For the most part, we don't want, or at least I don't want a lot of color coming through. I just want it to kind of kiss the page. You don't want it to be, now I've got quite a bit on there. I'm going to be more careful with that. Now I know that I've got a lot on my brush here, so I'm going to use that in the lower areas. And then move up once I've got some of that off the brush. And try to make things a little bit uneven. You don't want things to look too uniform, I don't think. Some of these areas I think I may have been a bit heavy-handed. That's where the bleed-proof white will come in handy. Okay. So I think for now I'm going to leave the trees. I'm going to wash my ink off in just the one vessel here. And I'm going to keep that. Try to remember not to put my brush back in there when I'm going into my watercolors, because I don't want the acrylic ink mixing with my watercolors, even just through the little bit of contamination that could happen on my brush. So let's see what we have here for, and that's another thing too, is I want to be careful with my brushes. I don't want to have my brushes that I use on a regular basis with my watercolors. It may not be an issue, but I don't want to take any chances with having the brushes damaged by using those other products. So I'm just, this is I don't even know if it says what it is. It's a sable bamboo brush. I've had it forever. It's not one I use on a daily basis with my watercolors. So I'm going to, I feel like I've got ink all over me. I'm just going to dab in a little bit more of this to sort of get that earthy background happening. And because it's a color we've used in our trees, it's going to be nice with the composition. And we'll bring that a little closer to the tree. And you'll notice that unlike watercolor, this ink doesn't want to flow, and there isn't as much water on the page, so that's going to be different. And let's just pull that down. I'm going to use that water there. And I'm going to just blot it to get it some texture, and on this side as well. I want to cover up a little bit of that goldy bit we had in the back. To some extent, I don't want to cover it completely because I do want that to come through as a highlight. But I just want to give it some kind of abstract-y texture. And I love this kind of shadow shape and color that's happening in here. So I think I'm just going to leave that. And then, I love that we can use our plastic and our paper towels and various brushes to just create organic kind of shapes. Be a little more careful in between these trees, I think. But I just want to bring a bit of that, and just, because it's behind some trees, I just want to add a bit more depth of color at the bottom. I'm just going to let that sink in for a tiny bit. There again is the importance of learning the relationship between the water and the paper and what you can do, so you know at different levels after a while you'll have a sense of what your pigments will do. Okay. So just by pulling things away, oops, something hit the ground, and I'm just going to a little more in closer to my trees, and a little bit in behind this one. And just to get some organic shapes happening. And I'm kind of good, I think, with that now. I like how the blues and the burnt umber have sort of come together. We can always add depth and different elements as we go along. It's a messy job, but somebody's got to do it, right? I'm going to go now with the black while things are still damp. And I just want to create just some interesting kind of shadows and shapes happening throughout the undergrowth and things that are happening here. So I'm just kind of dabbing things in, taking things out. You can see how that ink is just, it just gives that extra level of depth that I really, really love. And I'm not trying to make anything specific. I just want some shadows to happen in the background. Okay. See if we can make a little bit of a shape coming down into the rocks so that they're and we're going to go back into this with white afterwards, but I think what I want to do is just sort of lay a foundation of some undergrowth happening here with the black. This is the black ink, the black acrylic ink. And I just want that to come up a little bit so that when I lay some white over top of it once it's dry, it's going to have a nice strong background to make it pop, right? And I might be running out of ink in my little container, but that's okay. We'll persevere here. Okay. If I was to go in and add the bleed proof white now, it will, because it's very opaque and it'll just sort of muddy the colors, but I will show you how that would look. It is ink, so it's going to be a bit messy, but that's okay. You could use a blow dryer. I'm not a fan. I find it cumbersome. I find that it often can move my paints a little more than what I would like to see happening. So I don't tend to use a blow dryer, but we're going to try a little bit of the bleed proof white just to show you what can happen. And I want to, it's fairly thick in the jar. Sort of the consistency of, I don't know, pudding? I don't know. But we'll put some in the container. You don't really want to use it right out of the jar. You don't want to contaminate it. These little guys, these little containers are actually ashtrays that I found at the dollar store. I think there was 4 of them for $1. And I just love them. They're just handy for mixing and using little bits of paint. So I'm going to go, this is probably a no-no, but I'm going to go in with my Lebanson brush, if I can find it. Too many brushes. I may have dropped it on, oh, there it is. Because it's got that beautiful, beautiful fine point. And this is what I really want to have happening. I do have another liner brush here somewhere that I got from Michael Soloviev online. Let me see if that one's got a point that I'm needing. And that could possibly work as well. We'll try that. So because this bleed proof white was very thick, I'm just going to give it a tiny spray and just so that it's not going to glob onto what I'm doing. I'm just going to load the tip of my brush, just very gently, lightly. Let's see if I've got a spot that looks like it's almost dry. Let's try here. So you can use it to create interest, highlights. Here where I said I thought I was a bit heavy-handed with the tree, I could use that to just bring a bit more of the white into those darker areas that and the nice thing about it is if you don't like what it does when you put it on, you can cover it over once it's dry. You can cover it over again with your darker paints or your darker inks. I like that you can go wet on dry, so your paint is, or your inks are wet, but you can go over top and just sort of with a bit of a, I don't want to lay my hand in the wet paint. You know, just adding just the tiniest bit of white can give you just a sense of shape. If I wanted there to be, you know, snow on the rocks, I could Add a little bit there. I think what I would want to do with that is maybe going back to one of these little scrubber brushes and just buffing the edges a tiny bit. That gives me a sense that there's a bit of a highlight there. I kind of like that. There's a rock here. Let's see if we can just put a bit of paint on there, or bleed-proof white rather. And blend it into the rock. It does give you a sense of another bit of highlight. So I think that's kind of where I'm going to leave it now. Have some fun with it. Play around. Use some inks. Use some bleed-proof white. Use your color palette of your choice, and see where it takes you. I see where I've missed a little spot in here. I'll go back in and add a bit of the burnt umber ink in there. And I'll finish off the trees, and we'll show a picture of the completed painting at the end of the video. I hope you've liked this exploration of inks and watercolor today. I'm finding it fascinating. I really do think I'm going to be doing more of this in my studio for my own use. I do love the way they interact. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. We had some fun playing with inks, watercolor ink and acrylic ink, and some bleed-proof white mixed with our watercolors. I love the results. If you like what you've seen, subscribe to the channel or head on over to the members area.